Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Conversation at Noon. My name is Rebecca Tabor-Conover. I'm head of public programs here at the Connecticut Democracy Center. As you may know, the Connecticut Democracy Center is a nonprofit organization who operates Connecticut's Old State House on behalf of the Connecticut General Assembly. Today's program, we're very excited to welcome 4 recently retired members of the General Assembly as they reflect on their years of public service and plans for the future. Today's program is entitled From Public Service to Private Life. I'd encourage you as you watch today's program to share your comments and ask questions in the comments section. I'd like to start off by introducing our 4 panelists who are joining us today. State Senator Len Fasano represented the 34th Senate District communities of Durham, East Haven, North Haven, and Wallingford for 17 years. He served as leader of the Senate Republican Caucus for 6 years and established an urban affairs initiative within the Senate Republican Caucus. He's the co-creator of the bipartisan roundtable on hospitals and healthcare. Senator Fasano is the president and founder of Fasano, Ippolito, Lee, and Florentine, a law firm with offices in New Haven and Branford. He is also an East Haven business owner. Senator Fasano earned his Bachelor of Science degree from Yale University, a Juris Doctorate from Quinnipiac Law School, and a Master of Laws in Taxation from Boston University Law School. He has spent all of his life in New Haven and the surrounding communities and currently resides in North Haven with his wife, Jill. State Representative Joe Aresimowicz represented the 30th House District, which includes Berlin and Southington, for 17 years. He served as Speaker of the House for the past 3 years, having previously been House Majority Leader. Honorably discharged from the United States Army Reserve, where he served as a combat medic for almost a decade, Veterans Affairs were an important focus for him, and he was a longtime member of the Veterans Affairs Committee. Prior to being elected to the legislature, Representative Aresimowicz served 3 terms on the Berlin Town Council. He's the head coach of the Berlin High School football team and has directed Berlin midget football for the past 18 years, as well as coaching various other teams. A lifelong Berlin resident, Representative Aresimowicz attended schools in Berlin through high school, and he and his family currently reside in the town. State Representative Russ Morin represented the 28th House District in Wethersfield from 2006 until 2020. Most recently, he served as a Deputy Speaker of the House and as a member of the Finance, Transportation, Public Safety, and Legislative Management Committees. Representative Marin attended Wethersfield Public Schools and is a graduate of Wethersfield High School and E.C. Goodwin Technical School. He holds a state food service certificate and worked as a chef in the early 1980s. He's a member of the First Church of Christ in Wethersfield, serving on a variety of committees, and as a volunteer team leader preparing and serving meals at the South Park Inn Shelter in Hartford. Representative Marin is a former officer of Wethersfield Little League, as well as a former soccer and basketball coach. He formed the Wethersfield We Care program that raised funds and collected goods that were shipped to members of the military in Iraq, and the Russ Community Chest, which has raised money to benefit disadvantaged youth. And then last but not least, I'd like to introduce Representative Gail Lavielle, who was first elected in 2010 to represent Connecticut's 143rd House District, which includes most of Wilton, the eastern part of Norwalk, and part of Westport, west of the Saugatuck River. Most recently, she served as an assistant Republican leader and the House ranking member of the General Assembly Appropriations Committee. Representative Lavielle has over 25 years of executive leadership in the business world, as well as experience teaching at the university level. Prior to her election to the General Assembly, Representative Lavielle was active in public service on both the state and municipal levels and served on the Connecticut Public Transportation Commission, Wilton's Board of Finance, the state's Advisory Council for Professional Standards for School Administrators, and the Governor's Task Force on Rail Station Parking and Access. She was a founding member of the Norwalk River Valley Trail steering committees. Representative Lavielle holds an MA in French from Yale and a BA in English from Cornell, as well as an MBA in finance from UConn. A former music critic, she wrote reviews for the Wall Street Journal and is the author of a book on opera. She lives in Wilton with her husband, Jean-Pierre, her husband of more than 30 years. Thank you and welcome to all four of our guests today. We're so delighted to have you with us for today's program and reflecting on your years of service. One thing that kind of struck me as I was introducing all four of you is how involved you all have been, not just as members of the General Assembly, but also as just community members being involved in your towns and in local issues. I'd like to start off by asking, how did you get involved in public service and what made you decide that you wanted to have a role in the General Assembly? And maybe I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but Representative Marin.
Sure, I'll go. Sure, I'll go. It's a bit of a funny story. As a young man, not a young man, I was probably 5 or 6. My mom worked at the state capitol. She was secretary to a couple different speakers of the House, and so as a young guy, I got to the ability. I had the ability and the fun of just exploring the state capitol building, which was amazing in itself. And so I kind of grew up in that. She subsequently married a person that was a state rep and a state senator on the Republican side. So I had great exposure to the political process. And I think what really got me going, though, to bring me out, it was really the grassroots part. I was doing something with my kids, trying to raise funds for a playscape at their elementary school. And we were going through all kinds of hurdles and such on and so forth. So I decided at that time I went and interviewed and ran for the Board of Education, and that's really where I got my public service going. It started with trying to raise $25,000 for a playscape for kids. So I think I've kind of seen an awful lot, but the local aspect and the local willingness to get involved is what got me going and brought me to where I had the pleasure of serving for so many years.
Len, we can switch over to the Senate. I don't want the House to dominate the early going, so why don't you go ahead?
Well, I was never, I never ran for any other office but state senator. But I think what got me started, I was always interested in politics when I was a kid growing up. And I always wanted to be involved in the community. And I started to get involved in my community, in the land trust in East Haven, for example. And then I got involved in a mayor campaign local. And I realized how much you can do in government. When I decided to run for state senator, I wanted, if I was fortunate enough to win, I wanted to see if one voice could make a difference. In other words, if it was already predetermined how things would go and you're just sort of going with the crowd. And once I was elected, I realized that one voice does matter and you can effectuate change by having relationships and being logical and including people. And then I was hooked in politics. But so I'd say getting involved in my community is what my springboard was.
Representative Lavielle. Oh, if you can unmute, please.
I'm so sorry. It was the shock of being called Representative Lavielle because I haven't been that now for at least 2 weeks. The community involvement thing for me was very new because first off, I'm not from Connecticut, I'm from Texas. Second, my entire career, a little fragment of it was in New York after I left graduate school. And then the rest of it was in France. So I had this entire career in France and we were transferred back here. And anyway, when I didn't work anymore, my husband and I figured that it would be nice if we could live somewhere where we could really be part of the community because we hadn't experienced that living in big cities. And so we moved to Wilton And I was still working at that time and traveling a lot. And I discovered that you couldn't do much at night unless you were elected to something. So I joined my party town committee to make friends, quite honestly, just to make friends. And I did. And things began to sort of escalate. There were some elections that turned things one way instead of another. And it became interesting. I had never been interested in politics at all. I mean, zero. Literature, music. I worked on Wall Street. I mean, things that had nothing to do with it. And through one thing and another, it began to be something that I thought kind of played to my skills. And I also thought that I would enjoy it. And without a huge, big political commitment, I decided to do it. And no one in town knew who I was. And I thought, well, I'll have to fix that. So I did. I ran for local office. I ran for Board of Finance and won that. And then the next year I ran for state rep and stayed for 10 years.
Great.
I think my story is similar to many of the others on the call, with a unique twist. I was born and raised in the town of Berlin. Loved the town, very active in Little League, football, other community organizations. And I also held down a full-time job, and I, like many other people in the state of Connecticut, I had a part-time job also. I bartended at night at a local bar restaurant. And there was an evening that individuals from one of the town committees, the Democratic Town Committee, were in there, and they were talking about where the town should go, what direction the town should move. And I chuckled a little bit, and I said, boy, you guys are really out of touch. You need to spend more time talking with people that are in the community all the time, because that's not what we need. This is what we need. And they said, well, you know, you sound like you know what you're talking about. Would you like to run for office? And I laughed and I said, you guys would never let me run for office. And I went back to work. A couple of days later, one of the gentlemen that was at the bar that night called up and said, hey, we have a seat on the town council. If you really care about the community as much as you say you do, that you're willing to put your ideas out there and work with other people, we'd like to have you run. So I ran for the Berlin Town Council. I think I was the second highest vote getter coming right out of right into politics. That was more because of my parents. They were very active in the volunteer ambulance and fire department. My mother owned a local business. So I think I benefited from their name. Got active. 5 years later, was approached and asked if I would run for state rep. I thought about it for a while, and then I went on to state rep. And then my colleagues in the House elected me as their speaker 4 years ago. So I never thought I'd end up in politics, never thought about it when I was young, but really cared about my community. And somebody asked me.
You know, it's interesting. I remember hearing that story from Secretary Merrill of just how she got involved in politics, that she was asked. And so I would ask all of you, what kinds of things do you encourage your constituents to do or wish they would do to be more civically involved?
Okay, I'll go. I think it's exactly what all of us spoke about in some manner. Me personally, I saw something that I wasn't crazy about, and I decided to get involved. But I always have encouraged people that talk to me to get involved in a board or a commission, or get involved in their school PTO to really see, because it's easy to sit on the sidelines and complain about point A or point B, but when you start getting involved and you are part of a discussion, it gives you great insight into how decisions are made to get you to that point A or point B, but also makes you understand that, you know, not everything might be as simple as you're portraying it. So I've really encouraged, especially when I talk to young people, that they look at serving on a board or commission and get involved, whether it's in their school, in the town, no matter what might interest them, because there's an awful lot in all our communities. There's an awful lot of opportunities for people to volunteer, to give their 2 cents, and to make a difference. So I really strongly encourage that, and I've been saying that to people ever since I I went from Board of Ed to Town Council to Mayor, and then to this seat. So it's been a long time, 25 years, and I've been talking pretty much that same thing when people ask me how and why did you get involved.
I'll go. I think, you know, there's a, we make certain assumptions about things, particularly recently, that, for example, everyone, regardless of who they are, what they do, what they've been doing, they should be voting, they should be running, they should be getting involved in things. And I would say we have to realize something, that if people do all those things and they're not informed, then we have a bigger and bigger electorate, but it's not an informed electorate. So the first thing that I would say to people is, get more information, find out how things work. If you don't know how the government in your town works or the government in your state works, call your state rep, call your town committee, call your first selectman's office. The interesting thing is that if you're curious and you're not antagonistic, but you really have something you want to learn and something to contribute, you'd be amazed at how welcoming these people will be and how willing they will be to talk to you. There was one of the greatest pleasures that I had in office was actually being able to educate people about the legislative process. And there were people who really wanted to learn, and they were very surprised in many cases about how it worked. For example, people don't realize that all the drama that you see on the House or the Senate floor, all the decisions have been made first. Very rarely are they made on the floor. But people don't know that. They don't know what the process is. So I would say that people should be informed before all else. And also, you know, some people aren't comfortable with public life. They're not suited to it because it's not their temperament. So I would say, you know, get informed, look at it, and understand what it is. And then even if you don't get involved, at least you'll know a lot more than you did before.
And just as a follow-up to that question, Representative Lavielle, and to all of our panelists, you know, what would you suggest to constituents as the best way for people to learn about what's going on in their state government?
So I would say, I hate to say it this way, but, you know, we have this thing called Capitol Report, which is what a lot of us look at. And it's actually pretty good. It's like the Drudge Report at the federal level, state level, and you could Google Capitol Report, and that kind of lists a whole bunch of articles. That's certainly one way of knowing what's going on or what the conversation is. Read it for knowing it's still news and you need to find out more detail. But if there's a topic that's being talked about at the Capitol vis-a-vis through this Capitol Report, call your legislator and find out the real scoop on it. Not necessarily what you're reading, but find out whether it does have legs of a bill that's moving or what you could do to help the bill or to stop the bill, whatever it is. But that's a real good breadth of what is going on in Hartford. Certainly you could watch the CTN, but it's tough to watch a whole hearing to understand what's going on because they go on forever. And obviously watch the news and stay in the local news on your station to find out what's going on. And if you're curious, call your legislator up, both sides of the aisle if possible, so you get a breadth of the issue. Those are things I would think that could sort of cheat notes by looking at the Capitol Report, but that's where you could find out at least what conversations are taking place.
Great, thank you. And kind of a follow-up question that came in from the audience from Kate. How long should someone spend doing their research and becoming involved before running for office?
I mean, I think that's really up to the individuals. I just wanted to add on to what Len said also. We have a very robust website at the Connecticut General Assembly. It's cga.ct.gov. And when you hear about a bill, it will typically give you a bill number. It's either House Bill 5,000 and something, or Senate Bill 5, or below the 5,000 number. And you can actually type that number in and then click on the JF report, which is a joint favorable report. That's how we move bills out of committee. And you can go through and read the testimony of people that testified in favor and in opposition too. And then you could reach out to your reps. I don't think there's any one answer to how long should you spend doing research. before you run for office. You should have some familiarity with the issues. I think once elected, it really is, and I think everybody on this conference will say, it really is a crash course. We are required by nature of it to be a part-time legislature with full-time issues. And we have to really get a handle on all of them. And then some of us are lucky enough to be a committee chair and we become experts in some. So there's no rock solid answer. I think Len is absolutely right. You should get both perspectives and reach out to reps from both sides of the aisle or senators from both sides of the aisle and read some of the information that's currently available on the website. We are really lucky. We have one of the best websites in the country to provide you the information on what issues your legislature is debating.
I would agree with you on the great website. We just did a training with that with our staff, and it really is an amazing resource. This question is for all of our panelists, which is, what surprised you most when you were first elected to the General Assembly?
Well, I'll keep informed and go first. I think coming from a municipal background where I was mayor at the time when I ran for the seat, and the proximity you had to your constituents and the ability for give and take, and then going to the state capitol where I was only 7.5 miles from my driveway to the capitol, but my constituents very rarely came to the capitol. So it was how things are disseminated, how the back and forth goes. Whereas when I was the mayor, people would be calling my house. People would be stopping me everywhere I went to ask me questions. When I got to the legislature, I was getting emails, and the committee meetings themselves are totally different and such, and the formality. And, the thing that was my favorite part was the 3-minute time limit for public comment, because at the municipal level, there was 5 minutes before and 5 minutes after. And due to the sheer numbers, but just how you think you're prepared. Like I thought, hey, I'm mayor of this town. This is going to be a breeze. But when I got up there, I saw I had to learn a whole lot more. And Joe is a great teacher. And it's just I think the give and take back and forth between myself and the constituents and how things operated. And honestly, the thing that surprised me, obviously, that I was not prepared for was the discussion between lobbyists and legislators. That's something that I had very little interaction with as a local elected person. So it was quite an awakening, and I learned an awful lot.
I'd like to add in too, one of the biggest surprises for me, and again, I was new to politics, but I would pay attention to what was going on in Hartford. And it always seemed, if I watched the news or read the newspapers, that the Democrats and the Republican were just fighting. They couldn't get along. They couldn't come to the table together. And I thought that was disappointing. And when I got there, I was expecting that. But one of my very first meetings, it was a finance committee meeting. There was a great gentleman named Representative Belden, Dick Belden, one of the longest serving members of the House. He came up, sat down next to me, and he goes, "Hey, congratulations on your election. I'm here for you if you have any questions, anything you want to discuss. I've been here for X number of years. I really think this place is better when we all work together." And from that moment on, I operated under that assumption and realized very quickly that 90% of what we did, if not higher, was done in a bipartisan manner, that we all represented a large sector of society. If it was the House, it was 25,000 people. Senate, I think there were almost 100,000. And everybody up there is there for their own reasons, but none of them are militant legislators. Everybody's interested in trying to do the right thing. And we can agree probably 95% of the time. And Len and I had a great career working together. But the bipartisan nature, I think, really flew under the radar until I was there and met so many wonderful people from around the state.
Great.
Gail, did you want to weigh in on this?
Well, sure, but you go ahead, Len. I'll wait.
So I'll be a little less profound. First of all, I thought the building was unbelievable. I've never really been in the Capitol before, and it's just an awesome place to work with the Yellow Bean and Capitol. And I urge people to do the tours once the pandemic settles down, do the tours, because our capital is one of the most beautiful capitals in the country. So that really was something I was surprised about, not ever being involved. The other thing I probably would say is the time commitment. If you're going to do the job right as a legislator, is a significant amount of time you have to put in, and balancing the time commitment with family obligations and trying to make a living is a very difficult thing that no one teaches you. When you're running, no one tells you about. So when you get up there, all of a sudden it's thrown at you and you got to figure out this balance. So I think those are things that to me were surprises when I got up there that I probably didn't think through. And I agree with Russ and Joe on their issues that they've raised as well.
Yeah, well, just a couple of things before I'll tell you what surprised me the most. To follow up on what Len said about the building, when I was first elected, my parents came up and I took them for a visit. And my mother turned to me and she said, "I never understood why you wanted to do this, but now I know why. You like the building." The other thing with what Russ said, there is listen, there's no denying that there's partisanship in Hartford. There is, but people are on the whole very courteous to each other, and I think that's really true. And the hostility you see is out in the public. And I always think that that's interesting, that people expect that it radiates from state capitals and Washington and all that kind of stuff, that people are, I don't know about Washington, but they're very nice in Hartford to each other. What really surprised me, I did a lot of watching during the year that I was running. In fact, I went up there a lot, and the Senate used to laugh because they'd go, "What's she doing in here?" And I was sitting in the Senate because I didn't want to stare my opponent down in the House. I thought that was impolite. So when I would watch on television, I would notice people would get up and say dumb things, when they were talking in the House. I'll never forget a debate on the fat content of food should be shown on restaurant menus. And I remember somebody in the House Republicans standing up and saying, "Mr. Speaker, what exactly is a calorie?" And you'd see things like this, and I had no idea to what extent protocol and the way that things work and how you have to get amendments done dictated how maybe you had to stretch out a dialogue. You had to take up more time because somebody was working on an amendment, and you couldn't just shut down the debate until the amendment was ready. So there was sort of a general agreement that everybody would keep it going. And of course there were more sort of, political reasons for doing things like that. But a lot of times it was just silly timing reasons. And so when people watch, they think that legislators are saying dumb things, but in fact, you're protracting the debate. And I always thought those things the choreography was hysterical. I really enjoyed it.
Well, that is something that is new to me. And actually one of the questions that came up, which kind of follows up to what you were saying, is from Brian. And he asks, what is the biggest misconception about state government or the Connecticut General Assembly?
I would say when we are in session, whether it's the House or the Senate, there's times that we're just not voting and the chambers are empty. And everyone's saying they're wasting time. What are they doing? They're a bunch of knuckleheads. How come they're not moving bills? What is this all about? But really what's happening is conversations are going on, mostly substantive, that makes bills go more quickly. Agreements are reached. Conversations are taking place. Maybe as Gail pointed out, amendments are being drafted that may be bipartisan amendments. So there's a host of things that are going on. The misconception is we're wasting time, when actuality is we're actually doing a lot of business that's out of the sight of the public in terms of getting things in order. And as Joe says, 90+%, and I would say 95, 96% of the bills pass by either wide margins or are consent bills, everyone agreeing. And that's because conversations taking place to make a bill more agreeable and adopting changes from those who may criticize. So I think there's this misconception when we're in session that we're not doing our job or not doing anything.
Anyone else wanted to add anything to that?
This is I don't know. I think it's important to say. I think the misconception is that this is our full-time job and we earn six-figure salaries and we get state cars and all of that is absolutely not true. It's described as a part-time job. The base salary is about $28,000 a year, which, you know, is very difficult to live on in the state of Connecticut if you have a family and other obligations. We do not get a car. We all use our own personal cars. You are entitled to get a legislative plate if you choose. Some don't choose to do that. But it is a part-time job. We are a citizen legislature. And I think that's one of the misconceptions. We don't have huge staffs. I think, speaking for both Gail and Russ, they share one staff person with 3 other reps. And that person is responsible for all the constituent services that we're not doing directly. So it's not a full-time job, and it's not a very well-paying job at all.
And, you know, Brian, that's a very good question, actually. You know, and one of the things and I don't know if it's because of what we're seeing nationally, but there's always I think, a perception that, you know, Democrats and Republicans hate each other and aren't willing to work together. And I know Len and Joe touched on it, but some of the best pieces of legislation that I ever worked on were a result of sitting down with my colleagues from both sides of the aisle and working things out. And that's one of the things I always talk to young people about when they came in to the Capitol, that you really do need to compromise and, you know, and listen to other points of views. But, you know, I'll say this, I enjoyed some of the most interesting and heartfelt conversations I had and friendships I've made in my 14 years at the state capitol were with people that weren't Democrats. And you know, I think people sometimes see the news and we would see a Len Fasano, Joe Aresimowicz brush up on whatever channel you were watching. But in all reality, I mean, there's when you're fighting for what you believe in, you're fighting for what you believe in. But, you know, I can say that, you know, there's a great respect and I think a great like amongst our colleagues. And I wish people knew a little bit more about that. They just see the negative stuff. Representative
Lavielle, I think you were going to say something as well.
Yeah, well, I would agree with what everyone has said, that and we said it before, but that everyone is really very courteous and respectful of each other for the most part in the Capitol. And it's not personalized there the way that some of the arguments you hear outside government are. It's really kept very very cordial. And what Joe said about everybody thinking that we are highly paid, and I will never forget going to somebody's door, ringing the doorbell in Westport, and the woman came out and she said, I didn't have an American car. And she said, "How come you don't have an American car?" I said, "Well, that's my car." "I don't care. It's got a state license plate." I said, "Well, that cost me $14. And I think I'm going to take it off anyway. But it's a state car." "No, it's not." "Well, why do you have a driver?" And I said, "That's my husband." She just could not get it out of her head. People really do think. And I think the other thing people don't realize, it's a little arcane and procedural, but, you know, in Congress, they have Senate committees and House committees, and the Senate and the House do very different things. But in Hartford, all the committees are joint. There's a House chair and a Senate chair and a House ranking member and a Senate ranking member. So everybody is together in the committee process, and the roles are quite similar. So I think that's also something the general public doesn't know.
Well, you know, I've often wondered how members of the General Assembly do juggle everything, because you're working a full-time job to make a living. You're doing also your legislative work, and you might have family obligations. How did you manage to juggle all of those differing responsibilities?
It came down to me, the support system. I was married for the majority of my term and not married now, and that may be some sort of correlation, but you really have to rely on the people. And I never would have been able to do what I had done, serve both my local town and the state of Connecticut without the help of my ex-wife, Crystal. She really was the glue that held the family together, and she supported me in all aspects. I think it eventually got a little tiresome, but yeah, it's the support system. And it's the understanding of the family. Len briefly hit on it, but you miss birthday parties, you miss anniversary parties, you miss family get-togethers because you want to be connected to your community, you want to talk to your constituents, and there's a lot of obligations for you in Hartford. Len and I and our caucuses did the first bipartisan budget in Connecticut history that excluded the governor. For Len and I, that took almost 6 months of all day, sometimes all night meetings. And if not for our family members, we would have never been able to do it. So it really is the support system that you have at home.
I think that there are a lot of different situations. Certainly there are people who work hard in the legislature and have full-time jobs. And that's really something. There are people who live really close to Hartford, and there are people who live an hour and a half away. There are people who live in safe seats, and they don't have to run pretty excruciating campaigns. And there are people who don't. There are people who choose to work harder in the legislature than others do. And so it varies. My feeling personally is that to do it right, I think Len said this earlier, it really is a full-time job. You have nights and weekends, they're all taken up with events. You have to be thinking constantly. It's very difficult to switch off and focus on something else, although I know people who did it. I was fortunate in that I really was able to do it full-time, but I did live far from Hartford, and I did have a purple district. So, you know, it varies, but it's, I cannot imagine having all of those conditions where it's a difficult seat to keep. It's very, it's far away. There's a lot of towns, and you have a full-time job. I really applaud those people who are able to do that.
You know, I think that's an interesting point because, you know, I work full time and Grace and I have 3 kids. They're all adults now. But the balance of trying to pay attention to your job, pay attention to your legislative job, and not ignore your family is really quite a juggling act. I mean, I think one of the hardest things for me was I'd be at the LOB working on something or in a hearing, and then I'd get a call from work and I'd have to step out, and it's always switching back and forth between both of those because they both needed my attention. And I know my constituents never, you know, they wanted 100% of me all the time. That's your job. That's what you got elected for. Fully understood, but you know, on my part, recognizing that I do have to actually work, take care of my family, and one of the things that brought me to the point where I thought it was time not to run again. My wife and I, she was an amazing support through all these years. We both have aging parents that are requiring more care, and she was the one that carried that load for probably the last 6 years. And we have 4 grandchildren now, which are an awful lot of fun, but at that point, I'm saying maybe I need to spend more time with them and less time hanging out with Joe, Gail, and Len, which is tough. It's a tough decision to make as well. Don't get me wrong.
So yeah, I'll just echo everything that everyone said. I agree with all of it. I'm a lawyer by trade, and I actually started the firm a long time ago with my best friend since the 6th grade. And I think absent that relationship, I would not be part of that law firm because I used to be the rainmaker and I used to bring in a lot of business. And as time went on and I was in the legislature, I brought in less business, billed less hours. And I had a very understanding law firm, as I said, because I've known my law partner for so long. From a business side, I didn't pull my weight at all, not at all. So, but I was very thankful to have that liberty that they carried me in the firm. And that doesn't happen to a lot of people. So I've been very fortunate. And the family end, as everyone said, if your family's not behind you, you can't do this job, period. And the further you are away, there's demand. And as you grow in leadership from a regular member to a ranking member or a chairman to assistant leader to leader, that's when it takes an exorbitant amount of time, caucus management, calendar management, negotiations, and then pulling through for your caucus. That's when it's more than a full-time job, plus your district, plus everything else you have going on.
Senator Fasano, just to follow up with that, I wondered for both you and Representative Aresimowicz, what impact, good or bad, was there on your ability to represent your own district once you took on leadership responsibility? Did it make representing your own constituents more challenging?
You know, I would say it was more challenging because when you become leader, there's a lot more obligations that you have. As I mentioned, caucus management, which sometimes is some hand-holding, negotiating with leaders like Joe and Senator Looney, which takes time, nighttime and middle of the day time. So it leaves a little bit less that you could do in your district. So I think that is that you don't want to ignore your district, but I will say this: when the district does see your press releases as leader, see you on TV or radio, it's not a question of you not being around. They understand you have a different job and that perhaps you're not going to be as visible as you were when you're a regular member, but you never want to take advantage of that. You have to make up for that. But it just increases the stress and increases the time that you have to do it.
For me, I guess it was a little more unique too, being from a district that was represented by a Republican for 20 years, coming in as the freshman Democratic representative. My first few terms, I had opponents and I did very, very well in the elections. I voted against some controversial legislation because I felt as though that's what my district wanted on that. But at some point when I got into leadership, I then was the majority leader of the Democratic caucus. And I always said that I would work with my caucus to get the bills to where I thought they were fair, and it struck a balance. But ultimately, I would vote on them, and I would vote in favor of them because that was my caucus. And it was the same when I was Speaker of the House. I would try to work on the bills to get them to a level where I thought they were fair. But ultimately, if they were on the board, I typically was going to vote for them. My district was not happy about that. My district wanted the conservative or moderate legislator that they thought they elected originally. And while a lot of my leanings were that way originally when elected, through the process of maturing in the legislature and becoming a leader, it really did change. And ultimately, my last two elections, I had essentially people with zero experience in any type of government. Both happened to be younger people, and my district showed their displeasure. My last election, which I announced prior to was going to be my last election, it went into recount, almost 50 votes. So for people in purple districts, I guess the term, if I use Gail's term, really have to have the balance, and their ability to be a leader will ultimately give them difficulty at the ballot box.
Thank you. And with the recent pandemic that we're still part of, how did your role as a legislator change as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic?
I think it really changed for the worse. I know we don't have a choice. I understand our first obligation is to ensure public safety given the pandemic, but going virtual really has harmed the legislative process. It's harmed the conversations between a Gail and myself that otherwise don't caucus together, but would see each other in the building and say, hey, what about this bill? What's your thought? As much as I like to believe we're all glued to the computer screen and on the Zoom and listening and following attentively, I don't know that that's always true. The public's ability to have those not only official conversations, which is the ability to testify at a public hearing, which they still can do, but those other conversations to where a constituent of Len's is in the hall of the Senate or outside the Senate and asks them to come out and have a conversation for a few minutes. Those have all stopped. And I think it's made it very difficult. And all of us in this business tend to be people, right? We like to be around people. We like to enjoy that engagement. We like the back and forth. And with everything being virtual and remote, it really has harmed the legislative process. It's not nearly as effective.
And piggyback on what Joe said is I always believe the legislative office building where we do all our committee meetings and discuss bills is a living, breathing animal. And if you walk in there, if Gail, Russ, or Joe were to walk around, just walk around the hallways, they would have a sense of what bills had legs, what bills didn't have legs, where certain things are going, what's the environment in the building. And they don't have to talk to a soul. They just walk around the building and get a feel for the building. And an experienced legislator can get that feel. When the LOB is not in, you have no idea. It's stagnant. It's stale. You don't have the feeling of which bills are going to make it and who's talking to who and how things are progressing. So you're really legislating in the blind. And I think that's the reason, in my view, we were forced into it halfway through our session last year. But I think the legislature has to be very careful on what it does. The public is not going to be as in tuned. And as Joe mentioned, you could do these Zoom meetings, but it's not the same thing. You don't have the feel of the building or the bill, and you don't have the feel of the public. I don't care how many people testify on Zoom. You know, it's just like when you're talking to somebody, you're watching the body language, the head movements, the eyes, etc. You're talking on Zoom. Maybe you see the chairman, I think. I'm not really sure. But you're not seeing the entire body, so you're not even getting a feel as you testify. And I think all that has an impact. But most of all, as a legislator, it's tough to understand that building unless you're in it, listening to it, and figuring out what's going on. And that's why I say the LOB is a living, breathing animal, and experienced legislators can determine what's going on.
Let me ask all of you, and maybe we'll start with Representative Lavielle first. But how did you decide that this was a good time to make a move to other pursuits? All of you have been longtime legislators, and what are your plans? What are you going to do next? Are you staying in Connecticut, traveling the world when we're able to leave the front door? What are your plans?
Yeah, that front door thing is important. I decided about 4 years ago that it was going to be 10 years. And really the primary reason for that was it is so consuming to do this properly. And I found that I was thinking about it every minute of every day. If we went away, which we didn't do very often, if we left the country, I still was in it all the time. I had the computer on all the time. And I just felt like if I took my eye off the ball, I would totally lose touch. And I had too many interests in my life, too many friends all over the place. Certainly my husband was very tolerant during all this. And, you know, I was getting sick of inflicting it on him. It really took parts of me away that I hadn't been able to feed. And one of the most important ones was that the entirety of my career life, I mean, most of my adult life, was spent in an international context. I mean, I wasn't even in this country. All the work I did was abroad and cross-border and in different languages with different kinds of people. And in the couple of years that I worked in a context that was not in an international, I thought, this isn't interesting. I've got to get away from this. And I did. So here I was doing something entirely different than I'd ever done in my life, which I was happy about and which was interesting. But it did cause me to have to focus on a very tiny part of the world in a very tiny part of the United States. And so I figured that at the end of 10 years, I'd be about ready to recover some of those things that I like to do and that have been really interesting for me. So I'm in the middle now of, you know, I'm looking around at things that I want to do and things I don't want to do, because things come in. People invite you to do things when you leave office. And I've found 3 or 4 so far that I've been invited to join the board of a national nonprofit, which is very interesting, to do some think tank work. I'm thinking about a book, but I'm not sure I'll do it or not. I haven't made that decision. And I'm spending a lot of time on Baroque music because I intend to learn how to play, how to do Baroque improvisation so that I can play chamber music properly with people. That's a whole other.
Oh, fabulous. Well,
the first thing I did when I left office was read a book, because it was very hard to read doing all this.
Great. Well, perhaps we'll have you back to do a concert for us next time.
I wouldn't advise that, Rebecca. You'll lose all your audience.
Just as long as Russ sings.
Sorry?
Just as long as Russ Morin sings.
Exactly. Yeah. I'll remember that.
Representative Marin, why don't you tell us, why don't you go next in the lineup?
Sure. I'm not nearly as interesting as Gail, so I'm not sure where this will go. But you know, I had the privilege of serving for 14 years in the State House and 11 years prior to that at my local level. And you know, it doesn't seem possible that it's gone as fast as it has. But 25 years, almost half of my life, I've spent holding some sort of elected office. I've very much enjoyed it, but there's a price that had to be paid. And as I mentioned before, one of the reasons I recognized it was time to go, there were a few reasons. One was that, you know, I'm committed to my family, and I know my wife was carrying an unfair burden of having to take care of everything. The other part of it, I knew Joe was going. I didn't want to serve if Joe wasn't there. But you know, I think I had a great opportunity, and after 14 years in the state legislature, I was at the point I always said to myself, you should go before people want you to go. And there might have been people on this conversation that thought I should have gone 10 years ago. But I think, you know, I think it's good to have fresh ideas. I think it's good to have fresh leadership and different voices. And that's really kind of what steered me to go. But I won't lie to you. I miss it. I miss, I guess I wouldn't miss all this Zoom stuff, but as Len mentioned, walking through that building and talking to your colleagues and learning and giving your 2 cents and sitting down with lobbyists and trying to figure out where they're going on both sides of issues. I definitely miss that, but right decision. And I certainly am enjoying having more time with my grandchildren. And yes, Gail, I've been reading an awful lot, and it's very pleasurable. And if this is the end of it, I'd like to thank you for hosting this. This is a very, very good program.
Thank you. We'll be wrapping up in just a couple minutes. How about you, Senator Fasano?
I think Russ said most of what I was going to say. I think it was the right decision for me, but I miss it tremendously. What's in store for me? I mean, I'm sitting here before we got on Zoom. I'm writing a brief. After being a legislator, now to write a brief, it's not nearly as exciting as being in a legislature. I can tell you that. But you know, I'm gonna not have to, but I'll go back to being a lawyer. But I want to still be involved in policy someplace, somewhere. I don't know where that will end up or where that will lead me. But I still want to do public service to some extent, and that's where I am. So I haven't thought about anything except what I owe the firm at this point. So I'm doing some of that work, but it's not nearly as entertaining.
How about Representative Aresimowicz?
I think Russ hit on a little bit for me. We have the unwritten rule as Speaker of the House. Only a couple speakers have gone past 2 terms. And I think the reason really is for the growth of others. And I looked behind me and I saw now Speaker Ritter, I saw individuals like Jason Rojas, Tony Walker, and others. And I knew that the institution, which I think all of us genuinely love, whether it's the building itself or just the idea of what the institution stands for, we love it. And I really felt as though our obligation is to make sure the next group of leaders benefited from our experience, maybe some of the things we taught them, and they're capable and ready to take over. And I saw that behind me. So I knew it was time for me to move on. I do miss it. I guess I'm the unique one on the call. I've landed a new job, and I'm going to continue on with government relations. I'm working currently with Gaffney Bennett and Associations, a government relations firm in New Britain, which is right next door to my hometown of Berlin. So I'm still going to be active in the policy side and working with the legislature after the 1 year ban. But it excited me. I learned a lot. I met a lot of really great people. I can honestly say Len Fasano is one of my very good friends. Russ and I are nearly best friends. We've been together so long. So the building is part of me, and hopefully I left the building a little bit better than it was, if it was nothing more than just to start the house on time.
And one question came in from one of our audience members, from Samantha. Do you have any, and actually kind of two related questions from Samantha, do you have any advice for young people interested in running for office? And Brian asks, what advice do you give kids elementary school age about getting involved either in government or their communities?
I mean, I'll just touch base. Whenever the fourth graders would come in, I would talk to them about, working together. And I would also encourage them. I remember, I'm sure my colleagues remember, one of our colleagues put in a bill to ban smoking in a car that had little kids in it, and a bunch of little kids came and testified on it and started to have a discussion on that. And I brought that up to the young people to let them know that just because you're young doesn't mean you don't have ideas, and that your ideas may not be worthwhile. So I encourage them to always be willing to share their ideas and be willing to take a stand on things. And I think that's great advice for young people, to talk to them about how people get together and cooperate and things. So, some of the best discussions I've ever had, don't take this the wrong way, any of you, but have been when I'm talking to a group of young people, whether it's elementary school kids, middle school, or high school, just encouraging them to be involved in the things that they're living in at the time. And I always said to the young people that I hoped at one point one of them would be in the 28th district seat representing Wethersfield. So, just always encouraging them to be involved and not be feeling strong about their own opinions and voicing them.
Great, thank you. Any other thoughts anyone wants to share?
Sure. It puts me in mind of so many things recently, and I think Russ started to go there when he started talking. I would say to them to be very careful when they see things on social media, when they see things on news shows where people are screaming at each other. We seem to have gotten away from the idea that disagreement is a fine thing. And if you think somebody's wrong, that's okay. But there's a difference between thinking somebody's wrong and thinking they're a bad person. And disagreement can be very, very constructive. You can make great change by disagreeing with someone, having them disagree with you, listening to each other. Each of you changes your mind a little bit. That's what disagreement does. But personal animus, having disagreement immediately spawn personal animus is absolutely unworthy of educated and discerning people. Educated and discerning and decent people do not turn wrong or disagree into bad person. And I think that's one of the problems that the country has basically nationwide right now, and that's something that has got to stop. So I think that's the first thing that I would say.
I got to tell you, I think Gail hit it right on the nose. Absolutely. We can have disagreements and strong beliefs on something, but that doesn't mean someone is a bad person. Just means they don't agree with you based upon the perspective that they're looking at an issue. And I've always said, if you come into that legislative building year one and you leave X number of years later, and you're the same person that you came in year one, you lost the greatest experience that that building could ever offer you, which is the values that other people hold, that they express in debate or in conversation, because their life was different. Their experiences were different. It's not that anybody's wrong. It's how they view their life through their lens. And you have to appreciate that side of the argument. And if you don't, you're a fool. And you need to understand it. And you may not come to an agreement, but you understand why somebody feels that way. And that's okay. And that doesn't make anybody a bad person. You know, Joe alluded to the 2017 budget that we passed, historic budget that's now bearing fruits for the legislature this year, and that it has significant amount in the rainy day fund that we can draw upon to get through this pandemic. We had a lot of disagreements, and it took us 9 months through October to get through those disagreements. We had discussions we never had before in the building, but I'm a better person for it. And those discussions were honest, they were true. And when you got down to it, we had a lot more in common than we did not in common. And that's why we're able to do a budget. So I think that to people listening, young people want to get involved. Forget these talking heads, understand the issue. Don't scream, don't yell. I always say I'm Italian, so I'm not yelling. It's just that I'm Italian. But you don't scream, don't yell. You try to understand and you try to come to an agreement. If you can't, you can respectfully disagree. But there'll be another issue next week, next month, that you can agree with that person. It's not an enemy. It's just that you can't agree on that one issue.
Yeah, and what Gail said really was right on the money. But I want to give Len some credit, and he reached out to me a few weeks ago and said, "Look, I'm looking around. I see the news. I see what's happening in this country. I see the tone of the debate in this state. Would you be willing to go with me and offer a program to elementary, middle school, high school kids, to where you and I can go and talk about how we do work in bipartisan way, how we did the 2017 budget?" And a lot of the points Gail brought up, Russ brought up, and Len just brought up. And I think that's incumbent upon us, current leaders, elected officials, and former leaders, to get out there and talk to people, because it does have to change. This is not a sustainable path for political disagreements, to where every 4 years or every 2 years, we just pick out a new enemy and we won this time and now your party is my enemy. We're not enemies. We all need to take the D for, I say it all the time and I truly believe it with all my heart. We all need to take, once we're elected, you need to take that D for Democrat off your lapel pin and your R for Republican off your lapel pin and put the C for Connecticut on. And it's the same at the federal government. And until we get a new generation that dismisses and really does not condone that type of behavior, it won't change. So Len and Len's written the letter. I've just made some changes today. We're going to send it out to schools. And the more we can get out there and talk to kids about how you can do it in a way that respects each and individual's opinion, the better off that will be.
You know, I really can't think of a better way to end today's program than your comments on bipartisanship and working together. And I think we would be very interested in learning more about the program that you gentlemen are going to be doing with schools, since our mission is civics and history here. So we'll definitely have to be in touch on that. But I think it was a great conclusion. And we've had a lot of comments saying how much people have appreciated listening to your thoughts about your service in the legislature. So I want to thank all four of our panelists today for being with us. It's been a great conversation. We could go on, but I know you all have other things to do. And so I want to thank you for being part of this conversation and for your service to our state. Thank you so much. And I would encourage all of our audience members, if you have not had a chance to please fill out our surveys, which you can find in the description section of about the programs. And I would invite you to join us for our programs coming up in February. We have a great slate coming up on February the 4th, a program at 3 o'clock called Legislative Landmarks, Gradual Emancipation, which is what happened here in Connecticut. And that will be with Dan Broyle. On the slide should read Wednesday, February the 17th, because we changed it. It is not the 18th, it's the 17th at 6 p.m. Oh, excuse me, I'm totally messed up here. Yes, Thursday, February the 18th at 6 p.m. is an Encounters program, Origins of Hip Hop, but the next program listed, what to call a call to arms, should be February the 17th. As we changed the date, it's at 7 o'clock. And then we would also invite you to come on Tuesday, February the 23rd, to a conversation at noon, Ghosts of History, the Amistad's Lasting Impact. And last but not least, the other role that I hold here at Connecticut's Old State House is I manage Connecticut History Day, and we are gearing up for the contest season. And so we would really encourage you to sign up to judge at historydayct.org. Just go to the page on judges. So I want to thank everyone for being with us today. For our 4 fabulous panelists, thank you so much for being with us. And we look forward to seeing you at our next program.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.